Welcome back, Woo Crew. We have another episode for you today, and today we're going to talk about sacred pleasure. Today I'm joined by my lovely co-host,
Eileen. Hello.
and of course I'm here with all of the pups as we navigate this topic. Okay, before we dive in, first Eileen, tell me the most magical thing that happened to you last week.
I went for a drink with a friend on Friday night, and I haven't seen her in a long time. And we don't get to hang out one-on-one, I don't know, ever. And it was such a wonderful evening. We had such good conversation. It's so fun to talk to somebody who really just sees you as you, who accepts you for all of you. Like, she had some questions because she's like, what's this energy healing business thing? Like, what's going on? And I found myself I immediately kind of got on the science tells us it's a true, that defensiveness. And she knows me, and she said, no, I think that it's really cool. If you're doing it, there's got to be a reason. I'm not doubting it. And so it was really a magical evening of connection. And I found myself walking home just feeling so filled up, that beautiful reminder that being in the present with people who really see you and value you as you, that's all the riches in the world. It was wonderful.
What a projector gift to be seen for who you are.
I didn't even connect it with the projector piece, but yes, that makes so much sense. It was wonderful. How about you? What was your magical moment?
I had the most wonderful time. A friend of mine invited me to go to a dinner that was all about foraged mushrooms. And so there was two chefs. It's in a private house, and you get to bring your own beverages if you so please. We had a 6-course meal, and it was the most wonderful and delicious meal ever. And I do stand corrected, because I always said that mushrooms that are raw should not be eaten, because I just think it's wasted. There's so much umami that happens whenever you cook a mushroom. But one of the dishes was this wonderful thinly sliced mushroom with a vinegar and some sort of parm or something on it. And I may have changed my mind. So this dinner was so great. And I was a little nervous at first. It's family style, meaning you're just at this big table with a bunch of people. And the introvert in me was a bit hesitant to sit with other people. Fun. And it was just such a wonderful conversation back and forth between one side of the table and the other side of the table of people who had experienced this dinner before in some capacity with a different menu and different chefs, or who had been foraging because the company themselves does a foraging tour. And it's just so lovely. So if you are in the Vancouver area, go check out Swallowtail Production. They're lovely. And it was absolutely magical. I sat there and I thought to myself, wow, this is so special to be able to come to this and to be here.
I miss special food experiences that used to happen when I was in the restaurant industry, because it would happen, I'd have a boss who would get an invite to something and not be able to go or what have you. Every now and then you just got this really special experience in your lap that I don't often get anymore. And I miss, because food is, it's just so pleasurable.
It is, isn't it?
Which,
we're going to talk about
a perfect segue.
Yes. So today's topic is all about sacred pleasure. And as somebody who identifies as a sacred pleasure priestess, I'm over the moon excited to talk about this with all of you, and to have Eileen share some of her experiences, especially around birth and women in their pregnancy and how to become embodied in that way.
I love this topic too. I was saying to Ellie before we hopped on about how often my homework to clients is to receive pleasure in some way or another, because it is something that often as women we're not very good at doing, or we're not really in touch with. So it feels like a really potent time to be talking about this too, with the wheel of the year, the turning inwards, the tending to oneself, Scorpio season. And Ellie has a bunch of offerings right around this topic right now too. So it feels very aligned.
Yes. Okay, let's dive in. Let's talk about what pleasure is in general. The word pleasure is triggering to a lot of people. And sensuality. Like it's too indulgent for what actually, like for the work that we have to do in the world, you know?
Oh, that's why we get the term guilty pleasure.
Yeah, guilty. Oh, there is nothing guilty about that.
Mm.
So what is pleasure? Is literally anything that pleases you. So I think as well with the stigma of what pleasure is, we automatically go to like sex and orgasms. And yes, that is a piece of it. But it's just one small slice of pie when it comes to the whole thing of pleasure, the whole definition of pleasure.
Yeah.
And like I said, we've been trained to either see this as a reward or something that's bad. So it's indulgent, it's for later, it's when the laundry is done. Or as an indulgence, it's when, you know, oh, they have time for things like that. If we think about pitting each other against each other, it's something that other people have time for. I have work to do.
It feels selfish or like
Mm.
an indulgence, like we haven't earned it.
We haven't earned, oh my gosh, ladies, your pleasure is innate. You don't need to earn it for that matter.
No, just like rest.
Just
which
like
is pleasure.
Rest
Can be pleasurable.
Oh, it's for me it is.
Yeah.
What is sensuality? Sensuality is the other, you know, sacred sensuality, especially as we come to this. It's the enjoyment and expression of physical pleasure, but especially sexual pleasure. And we really have to remove what our mind often automatically goes to, which is dominance or penetration in terms of sensuality. Like there's something that needs to be dominated and there's something that needs to be penetrated. And sensuality is so much more to this. In the priestess world, we often talk about this as an archetype of the primal goddess, or even part of the ecstatic, and also as the snake goddess.
Yeah. Oh, it's so perfect that you say that, because for me, when I think of sensuality, immediately what comes to mind is like satin clothing and I don't know, chocolate and really lovely like touch-based pleasures. But I don't jump to sex. When I think sensual, it's there, but the first thing that drops is like eating chocolate dipped strawberries and champagne in a silken robe after just having gotten out of the most delicious bubble bath.
Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. I love this. It's true. For me, embodied sensuality is really this like a woman, especially a woman who is fully in their knowing of who they are and how their body moves and what they like.
It just came to me too that those things that I said I associate with sensuality, those things are really safe to associate with sensuality. I feel like we're going to touch on that at some point today too, but it just kind of landed in my body that, yeah, it's really easy to connect with that type of sensual, because aside from maybe not having earned it, there go the air quotes again, it's safe to say I love and want all of these things. It may not feel so safe in your body to say I love having somebody pleasure me. That side of sensuality can be harder to admit to desiring because of all sorts of things. 7 deadly sins comes to mind.
Yeah. Again, our pleasure is innate. We deserve it just as much as anybody else here in the world.
And those sins are made up.
Yeah, they sure are. Speaking of the 7 deadly sins, let's talk about where we went wrong. So with this other side, like especially in today, the belief often falls upon, again, the deservingness. That
who is allowed to desire pleasure?
Who is allowed to? Who is allowed to desire pleasure? So let's talk about yesteryear for a moment. We have had a really big disconnect between pleasure and sensuality through domination, through penetration and domination. And the belief of this came from even before the Catholic Church, before Catholicism, but became very apparent around the time that the patriarchal views started to come into play. And last week we touched upon the witch wound, and this was very apparent in the witch wound because a lot of women who were persecuted were embodied. and they were embodied completely understanding and knowing their own pleasure and their own sensuality and being able to express that in their everyday life. So prior to Catholicism and the introduction of patriarchal views, we had a devotion to the feminine. We had a devotion to sensuality. We had a devotion, like, for lack of a better term, and to sum up a lot of history in just a sentence, women came first. And you can interpret that in however many different ways that you so wish. But we had this true honor and devotion to the divine feminine because we are the giver of life.
And embodied sexuality was revered and very much understood as the like generative force that it is. You think about the oracle at Delphi, all of these kind of little traces where we have priestesses who are embodied sexually and revered for it and for the knowing and understanding that can be tapped into through that wisdom.
And we really over the last many years have had that belief or that reverence pulled out of us, knocked out of us, believed out of us for that matter, because of domination and penetration. And this is the very masculine side of things. And so when we look at, even if we go into the essence of toxic masculinity, it is the domination of the female form. It's the domination of the female, period. And we see this within Catholicism because we want you not to revere the other person, but to something else. And if we have you revering something else, then we can say, this entity, this person says this is wrong. Where in our hearts, we might feel different.
It's very interesting, the whole Christian to Catholicism to, I mean, it starts with Judaism, right? That's when we get this monotheistic worldview with a God who is not of this earth, that has no connection to this earth. It's like this disembodied Godhead figure in the very masculine, prescriptive, but detached way. I read a book called The Flowering Wand by Sophie Strand, and she makes this argument that precisely because God the Father and Christ the Son have no attachment to the earth, Jesus didn't even get to go back to the earth afterwards. It really divorces us from this feminine essence because the earth is generative, it is creative, it births things. And so there's an innate tie to the feminine, and to women, and people for millennia understood that. It didn't diminish the masculine. We talked lots about that in the episode on the archetypes. We need both, but it was this sense of cutting off from the lived experience and reality and putting this thing up there in the sky that you can't actually touch or interact with or understand, to impose fear and control.
Fear and control.
And it's the grounds for toxic patriarchy too, right? The piece of that is so wounding is that the masculine got separated from the land.
Yeah, it's not exclusive to the divine feminine, for sure. Let's talk about the good girl archetype and how it plays out in our current life.
Let's do that. This is one of the earliest blog posts I wrote. I started talking about this quite early on because when I first entered the coaching realm, I was really focused on rest. I still am, but clearly I've gone witchy. It's all connected. But this sense of rest being something that women couldn't take is very tied in to the good girl archetype or good girl syndrome. It's almost synonymous with people pleasing, but that's probably its most defining characteristic. When you say people pleaser, people know what you mean. But it also is things like conforming to fit in with the group, avoiding confrontation and conflict, putting everyone's needs before your own. That's that people pleasing, but suppressing your feelings, especially anger, because good girls don't get angry, and ignoring that intuition because it's going to tell you to do things that good girls wouldn't do, and shrinking yourself so you're not making other people feel uncomfortable. Those are like the big bullet points of what the good girl archetype is.
I keep coming back to like, how did we get here? And we really got here through the separation of either you are the Madonna or the whore. You can only be one or. And the good girl, you know, I think about years past staying in relationships because I was the good wife who could weather the storm. You know,
Here,
how many
here.
people out there are just hanging on by a thread, thinking, okay, it's just this one more. It's just this one more. Meanwhile, our intuition is screaming at us, going like, it's not just one more. The Madonna really is the person who puts everybody else before them. And we see this a lot, especially with mothers and caregivers in general, that everyone else's needs come first.
It's interesting that you speak to that piece of good girl archetype keeping you in situations that are so detrimental. I have like the most vivid example of that in my own experience, in my own body. When I was with my ex, I, for a long time, did not want to be. I was not happy and definitely doing that thing. He just wants to love me. He just wants a family. I can do this. This will get better. I just, all of those things, not wanting to hurt him caused me to keep hurting myself. And I ended up, I don't think I've told this story on the podcast yet. I ended up with heartburn that would wake me up in the middle of the night multiple nights a week, to the point where I ended up on a prescription medication, a daily prescription medication to manage it because nothing else would touch it. And I finally worked up the courage to leave, and my medication ran out a few days later, and I don't get heartburn anymore. Whereas before it would have me up, like I would be up for hours, sitting up in a chair in so much pain. So it was just like this perfect example of how much we'll put ourselves through to avoid hurting or discomfiting somebody else.
I love this, like the parallel between like literal heartburn and I guess no longer being in love and needing to move on, you know? I also think that we see this with women. So we talked about caregivers, we talked about being the good wife. We also see this with women who don't want to be put in the category of a slut or a whore or a floozy. I think of all the words that I possibly came across and or have been called in my life. You know, how bad is it that somebody just wants to go out with like revealing clothing on, like they asked for it. Oh my gosh, don't even get me started with this whole they asked for it thing. They couldn't be dressing in that way because it actually feels good for them. We come back to this curiosity of this. Why is it that women, anyone who enjoys sex in any way, or physical touch, or dressing the way that makes them feel really good about themselves, immediately, and admittedly, for a lot of my teenage years, it went to, oh, there's some negative connotation. Let's put them in this category. And I want to say here, one of the biggest threats to other women is a woman who is embodied. So a woman who is embodied is literally untouchable. And I think that this is what we need to be striving for. And I'll give the example of the focalizer of the 13 Moon Mystery School that I'm a part of. I remember for years watching her and thinking to myself, there's something about her that I'm not quite sure. Like, I can't put my finger on it, but I don't know what it is. And then having a discussion as I enrolled and started to do our 13 Moon school this year, having the discussion with one of my best friends and saying to her, like, she is so embodied that to the rest of us, that is threatening. We have been taught that this is a threat. And so for years where I was like, I can't quite put my finger on it, there's something that rubs me the wrong way. It was the level of embodiment that she has that I did not have, and the awareness that I did not have around that. And so that level of embodiment, I think, is something that is so threatening to us. So we think about how this plays out in our everyday life. The woman who has gone for the promotion and got it. The woman who wears revealing clothes, whatever revealing means, tight clothing, dresses, heels, any of these things that we have put into this imaginary category of revealing, and progresses at work. Well, it must be because fill in the blank.
It's a big piece of that story that I told last time. I'm quite sure that's why I got that nickname in high school of raver slut, because heaven forbid I was embodied. I really was. I
Yes.
didn't care. I was pleased with the way my body was. I was showing my skin very in style, and I was dancing the way I enjoyed dancing at the dance. And definitely that was a threat.
What a threat. My
Yeah.
goodness.
Yeah.
This is also really played out in the high school dynamic. Like teenage girls, it is my mission in life to be a part of changing the way that teenage girls see themselves and each other, because it is whew, that's tough.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, this archetype between the Madonna and the whore, you can be both. You get to be both. A good mother, a good wife, in the sense of giving the middle finger to the patriarchy, and be ravenous behind closed doors, or within safe spaces in public, if that's your thing.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about birth and sensuality.
This is an interesting one. It's something that doesn't get talked about often, and especially in our culture.
Okay.
So I had a moment over the weekend. I was reading The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate, and I came to this chapter. It was about birth, and I started crying. I saw these two names. It was very interesting. I saw these two names that would mean nothing to people outside the birthing world: Michael Klein and Michel Ledin. And I just started bawling, and I stopped reading and came and sat down to write about birth and the sacredness of it, and how hard it was to be a midwife in a culture that doesn't revere women and birth and their sovereignty and their bodies. In a culture that fears birth, how can we find any kind of pleasure in birth? And not to say that most births would be pleasurable throughout, because the reality is, for most people, it's painful. Just is. But it's not. I always used to talk to my clients about, it's pain with a purpose, but it's also not painful like a broken limb is indicating a wound. It's a pain that comes in waves. It's one that your endorphins ramp up with to match. And there is so much pleasure in the experience of birth, because you've got this massive cocktail of hormones on board. Endorphins, these are the opiates of the human body. So there is real pleasure in the birthing space, or there can be if it's allowed to be there. And it's innately sensual. If women are embodied, if they're able to go into birth without fear, with good support, and that space is kept sacred for them, there is an innate sensuousness to it, sensuality to the whole process. There's been times I've noticed many times in those rooms where birth is working, where birth is beautiful, where my job really is what it should be, is to sit on my hands and hold the space. There's often this deep kind of sexual thrum to the room. And some people might be like, that's weird and creepy. And it's just not. It's just not. It's innately connected to our sexuality and our sensuality, and it is a massively tactile experience, right? There's so much physical sensation that happens at each stage of birth that it has to be tied in to that embodied sensuality piece, or it should be. So certainly some women do have ecstatic births. They're rare. I never saw one. I've seen one filmed. But I have seen women enjoy their labors and their births and be in a state of real pleasure in between, talking, getting massaged by their partner, being in that state, and really just going inside and letting those waves of contractions wash through them and bring their body or their baby earthside. It is sacred sensuality at its peak.
It really is. I also want to touch on something that you said, which is there's a thrum of sensuality in the birthing process. And I think that what we have done so well over the last millennia is remove that thrum of sensuality in all that we do and add in the, for lack of a better term, penetration and taboo of sex and of sensuality, because it's like, it's something that we want, you know, like that instead of it being something that we desire or a state of being, it is a conquered state. And therefore there is a moment, a belief of, oh, that's wrong. That's taboo. There's something that needs to be behind closed doors with that. I actually personally love watching birthing videos, because I think that there is just something there when a woman is going through that transition of maiden to mother, like those exact moments, and their realization of it happening as it's happening is miraculous. Women who have birthed, you are the literal portal for new life. Think about that. Take some shrooms, think about that, call me in the morning. You know?
Yeah, I love watching birth videos too for that.
Yeah.
That and that the claiming of that power.
Just like clap, clap. Like I just cannot. It's the most amazing thing ever. And I think it's the same thing when we talk about being in the bedroom, is that there is this tabooness about it, to want it, to want pleasure and to want to embody pleasure, and that we have to save it for behind closed doors. We have to save it for just between two people. We have to save it for without the kids knowing. You know, there's so many things. I think about women who birth in front of their other children, like, oh, that is cool. That is so incredible, you know. Even the act of birthing with their partners, like having, come with me on this journey, everyone, for just a moment. Like to the utmost incredible experience to have your partner in devotion to you. Just like ego lost, ego put aside. My only job here is to ensure that you have exactly what you need at every moment, so that the only job that you need to do is to become the portal. And if we had more men in playing that role, instead of fearing things like even period blood, come on. We have gone off. I have gone off. I am rogue, and I will never come back to the place that we said that we were going to go. We have gone off script, people.
Yeah, but it's still relevant. I want to come back to the piece you said about that partner being in devotion to their partner who is giving birth. And realistically, the majority of partnerships having babies are a man and a woman. And so I'm going to use the word man, and also because women tend to be a bit more nurturing to begin with. And so it was always an interesting dynamic to witness in the birthing room with heterosexual couples, because you could really tell which men were worth keeping around. Really, to put it really bluntly.
That was a little loud.
When when everybody's been up all night and the woman's been laboring all night and the midwives have been taking care of her and are definitely not complaining about being tired, because that is not something you do on the job, no matter how tired you are. And dad's over in the corner trying to sleep and being annoyed when the lights come on, or like when noises happen, or who's talking about how sore his back is because he's been bending over like doing hip compressions or something.
For a quick moment, I was like, I'm going to be a midwife. And I probably would have literally ripped people from limb to limb if that happened.
Yeah.
I have zero patience.
Zero. I know it's not. You're like, and you can leave now then.
Yeah.
Just go. She doesn't
what would be better?
You're not helpful anyways.
You have done your job here, please. Let us do the rest. Let us carry through this really.
And you're not actually doing the part of your job that should continue here, which is that being in devotion, but also being in intimacy. I want to make sure before we move on. Ina May Gaskin is a famous midwife in the States. She basically revitalized midwifery in the 70s, 60s, and 70s. She has a birthing community called The Farm. They have incredibly low rates of intervention and incredibly high outcomes. And she always would say, what gets the baby in gets the baby out. And midwives are very well known to, if labor is stalling, things are slowing down, or things are just not progressing as quickly as everybody, the mother, AKA, would like.
Mhm.
One of our tricks is to say, okay, you two be intimate. Like, we're going to leave the room and give you some privacy. You two be intimate, touch, kiss, play with her nipples, like make her feel really good and sensual, because that releases oxytocin. And what do we give women to augment or induce their labor? Oxytocin.
Mm.
And you can do it without that intervention. And that's one more piece of how we've taken birth away from women and their sovereignty and their knowing, is in the hospital. Like, nobody's going to be like, we'll just turn off all the lights and leave the room and let you guys fool around and see
Oh
if
my
that
gosh.
works. No, it's, oh, things aren't moving along quickly enough. We're going to need to like up the oxytocin or give you oxytocin. There's no other way. Yeah.
I'm tight-lipped at this right now. Ina May is somebody who made me realize that, when I do give birth, I want it to be as free birth as possible, as the least amount of intervention as possible, because we are made for this. We are made for this. And we should not deny ourselves this. We have been, over the many years, it has been bred out of us. To note here, as a curious thing, I saw on a really reliable source, called Instagram. I saw the other day a little tidbit of information of, it was some sort of, I believe, French, I don't know, aristocrat that loved watching women birth, which is why he wanted them to be birthing on their back. And herein lies the positioning of a pervert, if you will.
It's, I mean, that's probably not the actual fact, though it's feels like it hits a little too close to home. It's for the doctor's comfort. It's because
it's the most
they want to be able to see. I don't know what they need to see. Like, the number of times I've caught babies under the water where people are like, do you need the lights on? I'm like, what would I need the lights on for? Like, sure, flick them on after so I can make sure she's not bleeding too much, but
Mhm.
like, no, we don't. And for their backs, I mean, and if you're going from room to room, they've got birth in hospital where one doctor is attending to multiple women, then yeah, it will wreck their backs if they have to get into funky, weird positions. But that's actually Michel Audin, that French obstetrician that I mentioned, who came up in the myth of normal. He advocates for any position the woman wants, but definitely not flat on their back.
Yeah, it wasn't him that was the
No, it wouldn't be. It wouldn't be. He's not an aristocrat. He's like a geriatric, amazing, beautiful. Oh, I love Michel Audin. I read his name and this little quote from him, and I just started crying. He's wonderful.
lovely. Thank you for advocating for us. Like, thank you for advocating for us.
Yeah.
Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about modern day pleasure.
Yes.
This is something that, with the women that I speak to and work with, it's interesting for me to really see how we deny ourselves pleasure, like every day, in every little way, or how we use pleasure as a reward system. Like, if we get all the laundry done, then we'll be able to sit down and watch an episode of TV, because if watching TV is pleasurable to you, then this is a form of sacred pleasure for you, And on this same note, how threatened toxic masculinity is. And I see this as, in the queer community, this is not just dudes, cis men. This is just toxic masculinity, even if your partner is embodying this, that are threatened by the use of other tools, either alone for a woman or partnered. So that a vibrator is going to take their role away. And I think to myself, one of the most embodied and empowering thing that you can do, which we'll talk more about later, is knowing yourself. But knowing yourself is that embodied piece, which then becomes a threat. The vibrator or the dildo or whatever it is that you're using for that sort of pleasure becomes the threat. It's something outside that has to become the threat and therefore shouldn't be used in quotations. But I also hear from women who don't know what is pleasurable to them. So they have done things, again, this comes from people pleasing. They've done things for others their whole life. When I ask them, like, okay, well, what's pleasurable for you? Like, what do you like doing? And often there's a justification that has to come with this. Like, well, I really like sitting and reading in the morning, but I really should get the kids ready for school, or I should make breakfast first. And I think this really comes back to being in right relationship with ourselves and to be in right relationship with our partners, to relinquish that 95.5% rule of, if you are a mother, that you're responsible 24.
There is also that sense too of not knowing what you find pleasurable, especially if you've transitioned from a woman without children to now being a mother. Often in those first few years, especially, you lose this piece of yourself. There's a huge shift compounded by the way that our society views and tells mothers how to be. And then you might ask that question, well, what do you find pleasurable? And the legitimate answer is, I don't really know anymore.
I don't know. And I think, that transition from maiden to mother is a big jump. And there's a belief that we have to leave behind our, like, the archetype of the maiden is embodied sensuality. And we have to leave that behind in order to become the caregiver, to become the Madonna, to become the mother.
A good mother, anyways.
A good mother. Oh, a good mother. I'll tell you what, a good mother is also satisfied.
Yeah, she's filling her own well. Thank you.
She's filling her own well is correct. And I also see this, and this is a good discussion around orgasm restriction, because all an orgasm is an individual's capacity to hold pleasure. And when we can no longer hold this amount of pleasure, we orgasm. And for some of us, our orgasm cup, our pleasure cup is very small. And so it gets filled quickly, or it gets filled throughout the day. And for some of us, we have a very large vessel, and therefore it takes a lot for us to get to that point. But the restriction of orgasm comes from women not wanting for it to be over, because we've come this far. I don't want to lose this feeling. And then the flip side of this is something that you spoke about, which is not being able to orgasm because you're taking too long. Is there anything else you want to say about that?
Yeah, when I read your note about the not wanting to be over, I was like, I don't even know what you mean. Like, that doesn't resonate. No part of me has ever, until quite recently, felt that way, where I could be relaxed enough to enjoy not wanting it to be over. I immediately, the moment that I've been with any partner where they were trying to help me orgasm, I immediately flipped into, my brain goes, I have to make this happen as quickly as possible so that they don't have to be on there for that long. To the point where I faked it a lot for a lot of years, for a very long time.
Sister.
Yeah, it was until I read "Come as You Are" by Emily Nagoski, which is
essential reading.
Oh, that's essential very essential reading. But it's people pleasing to the nth degree. I don't want to not orgasm because then he'll feel like he wasn't very good at it or something. And I don't want to take too long because then he might get tired or wonder why it's taking so long and feel badly about his skills or whatever. And obviously, when you're having these thoughts, you are getting further and further and further from orgasm. It's just
that like, there's just a hole in that vessel, and it is gone. Just flowing out of there as fast as possible.
And the converse too is that the moment I decided to stop caring and just enjoy for the sake of enjoying, now it's never long enough. It happens so fast because I'm comfortable and I'm like, oh yeah, this is gonna happen. And so it's that piece of allowing to receive, not worrying, sometimes it doesn't happen. And I can just say after a while of enjoying, it's not going to happen today. And that's fine. I'm in a place with a relationship where that is okay to do.
Right. I also think you're bringing up something really important, that as a little anecdote from my experience, from my past, having a partner, actually a partner that recommended the Come As You Are book to me. So thank you. Thank you. And understanding with them that there was a nervousness of it not happening. Like, what if it doesn't happen? And soothing them whenever we were engaging and saying, I'm here. A, I'm here all night. B, I am here to have fun. And so if all we do tonight is have fun without a climax or without a peak, I'm here to have fun. And I think taking that pressure off, because especially in the penetrative and dominator world, it is to get to the end. Get to the end.
There's a performance to it.
Oh, there's a performance. And the whole point is really to find an opportunity for pleasure to happen throughout however long you want to engage in that. And it just
can feel really good without a climax.
Yes.
It can still be pleasurable, and it doesn't need to, quote unquote, come to completion.
Yes. And speaking of this, and reliable sources of the Instagrams, where we get our news. Here, sponsored. No, I'm kidding.
We don't, except we can't even get news in Canada.
We can't even
anymore.
This is why we have posts like this. There was a post that apparently was from a gentleman saying, do women even orgasm? Like, is the female orgasm a myth? And he goes on to say, I've never been engaged with somebody who has ever had an orgasm, like a female that's ever had an orgasm. And the response by some very quirky, probably fellow sister of mine, said something along the lines of, this is a really long explanation for saying you can't make a girl come. Like, this is exactly what that was. So yeah, I think we put a lot of emphasis on that climax, and sacred pleasure is the act of devotion. And just like if imagine, oh yeah, I'm actually going to talk about this. I have been sharing recently with some friends. It was my birthday a couple of weeks ago. And as a Scorpio, we are put in the category of the stinger, but we're also apparently the most sexual of all the astrological signs. Although some of you out there are just closeted, and I'll pull it out of you. But I was saying to a friend of mine, the plague of the Scorpio, from my perspective, from this lens, is that anything to me can be made into something absolutely sensual. And when I was in Nevada City earlier or later last month, I got to go see an open mic, and there was a gentleman who was playing guitar, and we were in the front row, and it was literally the most exquisite experience. He was singing sort of folky kind of music, but he wore a hat, and underneath his hat, he had two braids, one on each side, and his braids were absolutely perfect. They were just like the care he put into those braids for perfection. Like, not a hair was out of place. The elastics were all stacked properly. Like, the observation of the Scorpio is this, okay? And when he sang into the mic, he sang with his eyes closed, and the way he strummed his guitar was just like, there was a certain sensuality about it. He was embodied. And as I discussed with some colleagues post this, I had a moment where I questioned, am I straight? What's going on? No, it's just the water in Nevada City, people. It's lined with gold and crystals, okay? And ovulation, okay? And I said to my friends, like, this is what really appealed to me of that person. The amount of care that he put into his braids. Imagine him as a lover. Like, if he put that amount of care into his braids, what kind of care could he put into you? And attention to detail. And the way that would he sing over you after he made you climax? Is anybody else blushing? Please write in to tell me if you're blushing at this moment, because I am blushing thinking about this. What kind of care could he put, and devotion would he put into you? And I really think that how we walk in a lot of ways, how we walk in the world, how we do anything is how we do everything, And so how is it that we can really care and be devoted to the pleasure that we have, and how can that be embodied in so many other things. I think of this as chefs as well, like the care that they put into their food. As I was speaking about this event that I put on, oh wow, just wow. So the plague of the Scorpio is that literally anything can be turned into somehow a form of pleasure. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's move
Mm-hmm.
on to what can sacred pleasure do for you? This is something that I really want to talk about because it's indulgent to people. It's indulgent. Why would we even add pleasure to our lives whenever it's for the neighbors to have, or so and so who doesn't have children, or this person who's newly dating, again, dating after so many years. I've been married for this many years, and therefore, we just go to bed at night. We just log into our Facebooks and scroll as much as we can before we go to bed.
Yeah.
What does a self-pleasure practice do for you in today's age? And I think the number one thing that it is, well, it turns you on. So that ripples out into the rest of your life. Let's just say that. But number two, it makes you a better communicator. Because if you're able to understand your pleasure, you can express that. I mean, there's lots of other factors. We have to build in trust. We have to build in, a mutual communication practice to begin with. But you are able to communicate what your needs are better when you know the reward of your pleasure. Okay. And knowing yourself, this is what I think, we put a lot into coaching. We put a lot into personal development books. We put a lot into all of those things because we are stuck in the ego. We're stuck in the mind. And then a super simple practice is, how does our body feel this? How can we be embodied in this experience? And this goes from walking my dogs, and one of the pups sets off the other 3 pups into a fit of barking. Like, how can I find pleasure in this moment where I'm just like, guys, we need to settle down here. Okay. That was a squirrel. It can do what it wants, How can we find pleasure or find some thread in school drop-offs, in mundane scrolling, in, how can we bring it back into this sacredness of what we do in our everyday life, that it's something special? The way that we drink our coffee, the way that we literally smell the aroma of whatever beverage we have in the morning, all of this can come back to lighting up our senses, which is a form of pleasure.
It is, for sure. And even more benefits to a self-pleasure practice when you're thinking about when you say the term self-pleasure, what comes to mind? Having fun, bringing yourself to climax, or at least turning yourself on. That can do things for you too, because it turns on your creativity. It activates that divine feminine inside of you, and so you're more creative. It can clear your head. It also makes you magnetic. When you have an orgasm, you radiate. I have a mentor who, you can probably all figure out who it is, and she wouldn't care, but she has hopped on calls and been like, I had the best sex with my husband all morning before getting on this call, just so that I could it was a money course, and we're talking about magnetizing money and bringing it in, and that embodiment of the sensuality and the sacred pleasure piece is a huge piece of calling in your desires.
Yes. I also there's a whole practice of sex magic. And as you climax, thinking about your manifestation. How do you think we came up with this podcast? It's something that is so innate in my life. If doing even not just that specifically, but there's pleasure in my life that I engage in a lot to get these creative downloads. And this morning, I mean, we'll leave something to the imagination, but this morning was really getting up and spending an hour in bed while reading and drinking coffee. And, the pups were still in bed themselves. And it was just this moment by myself that I was able to let those creative downloads come in. So it's not always about the climax, but I'll tell you, it's great when it is.
It is.
So I want to talk about ways to add more pleasure.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was like, let's hop into that and kind of tie this all up in a neat little bow.
So ways that we can add more pleasure. Of course, we have the climax, we have the self-pleasure, the orgasms, we have partnered pleasure, we have all of those things. Those are sort of the givens. But the one I really want to focus on is how you dress. This was a key for me. And you mentioned before about sensuality is a silk robe. A few years ago, as I started to really embody this, I got rid of so many things in my closet, and I got rid of them because they didn't make me feel good. So if the fabric, made me stinky, okay, people, polyester and I don't get along. If,
Nope.
or anybody get along, really.
Or anybody.
If the fabric was scratchy, if the cut of it felt tight or restricted, and especially like in the shoulders for me, like if there was something in the shoulders, I'm like, I can't do this anymore. If it felt like I needed to squeeze myself into it, any of those things, when it came to what we wear, this is one of the first lines that we can really show ourselves care and compassion and pleasure, and induce pleasure in our lives, is just how we choose what we wear. And it's not to say that you can't wear jogging pants. Yes, I have a pair of my favorite joggers, or t-shirts, or oversized t-shirts, or your boyfriend's t-shirt, or whatever. But when you put that on, does that make you feel embodied? And if that's not what you want to feel today, totally fine. Got it. Check. But we're walking around wearing shit all day long because of fashion or cost or fit, especially as somebody from a bigger body. We think we have to surrender to whatever fits us. And I'm not here to just wear something that fits me, And so I actually became really picky with what it is that I bought. And I have a hard time purchasing things online because I want to be able to feel the material.
Yeah.
I purchased some dresses that I returned a little while ago from online, and I couldn't even take it out of the bag. Like, I put my hand in the bag and I was like, this is a no. And my wife was like, don't you want to? I was like, no, I do not want to try this on. I will not put this on my body.
Yeah.
No.
It's interesting. For me, I definitely feel that. I've been trying to be more intentional lately about what I purchase. For me, it's adornment. It's my jewelry. I love putting on jewels. I don't wear a lot. I wear earrings and a necklace most days. I'm wearing neither today. You can tell how this day went by what I'm wearing as we film this. But that's my piece of pleasure. I have a few pieces of jewelry that I really love, and putting them on my body is sacred.
Yes, adornment. We think about even, makeup, no makeup. Perfumes. Oh my gosh, like aromas, scents, putting essential oils in my hair. We talked about this as well. Putting essential oils on my body is definitely something that brings me into this being of embodiment. And it's just so wonderful. And the last piece I want to talk about is like being in nature. Being in nature is something that we talked about at the top of this podcast, is something that Mama Nature doesn't lie, first of all, and she is inherently pleasurable, unabashedly blooming whenever she wants, unabashedly providing for you, so to nourish you with her plants and medicines, and for us to be immersed in nature is a great way for us to see the joy and the sacredness, because nothing is by accident in nature. Nothing is just like, oh, maybe today I'll have a blade of grass. Like, even blades of grass that come up through the concrete, like, it just wants to bloom. It just wants to express itself. So why are we sitting over here denying ourselves that? Yeah.
So good. There's so many more things we could dive into, obviously. We could go forever, but we will come back to this topic, I'm sure, and go deeper into the areas that we touched on today.
And if you, as part of our Woo Crew, we want to hear from you. What is a takeaway from today's episode, first of all? And where do you really love to embody and express or experience your pleasure? We would love to hear from you. Come on over to our social medias, our Instagram, and let us know through our Instagram there.
We love hearing from you. And it's fun when it comes onto the Woo Crew Instagram, because then we both get to read it.
Yes, exactly.
Do you want to chat a little bit about all your offerings, since they align so beautifully with this topic?
I do. I definitely do. Okay, so if you want to join me in the next few months, really from now until the end of the year, my concentration, my focus is really on sacred pleasure. So the first thing that I have coming up is a talk with Kyla Gagnon Actually, it's a talk with myself for Kyla Gagno with her Sacred Essentials. She's at the Sacred Essentials, and she has a whole membership there. We're going to do a Sacred Pleasure masterclass. So that's totally free. If you want to sign up, I will post some links in our social media, and we'll put them down below so that you can register for that. It's a Zoom call, November 14th at 7 p.m. That's number one. Number two, I have a Sacred Pleasure ceremony that we're doing. And this is going to be really to get into an experience of sacred pleasure, to let go of some negative beliefs that we have around pleasure. And it is ceremony style. And so it's going to be rich. It's going to be juicy. Is really what it is. You're going to be able to like gnaw on that for weeks afterwards. And that's online on November 25th. And then I have a Sacred Pleasure retreat. It is an in-person retreat for anybody out here on the West Coast or that wants to fly out to the West Coast. It's in Souk, BC, and it's with Kyla that I mentioned, who's an incredible breathwork facilitator, and my dear friend Andrea Bath, who is let's call her what she is, a sacred writing priestess. She's somebody who leads women through their manuscripts and into expressing themselves through writing. So we're going to do a full day, 10 to 5. Meal is provided. It is literally hop on it because it's so magical.
It's going to sell out.
It is going to sell out for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the Sacred Pleasure things I have going on for the next little while. Eileen, what do you have going on?
Yeah, as of the airing of this, the Soul Council sessions they're not going anywhere. The price has gone up a little bit, but they are still so impactful. I actually had one today, the day of recording, with a client who started off being like, I don't know, like I'm all in my head. I'm pretty skeptical. How is this gonna? And after she was like, wow, that was really deep and cool. And I don't even know. It was just that. Oh, it's so fun. It's such an affirmation or a reaffirmation of the power and potency of this offering. So that is available. It's on my website. It's down below. Unleash Your Inner Witch round 2 kicks off tomorrow. So if you're listening to this on Monday, there's still time to hop in. I'm closing the doors at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time tonight. So if you're listening to this after that, you'll have to wait for 2024. But that's going to start tomorrow and it runs for 6 weeks. There's live calls weekly, but if you're just catching the recordings, there's lots of value there too. And we touch on all things, woo and witchcraft, and you get a chance to ask questions and engage. And it's been really a delight to carry that container. And beyond that, I have a talk coming up with Kyla as well in December, but I don't have the date yet. It's going to be on cyclical living.
Love it.
Stay tuned for information. And I am offering like a 30-day, I'm not calling it a sprint, I'm calling it a sigh. To help people step into 2024 with a little bit of like comfort and loving up. And we've been talking about how busy everyone is, how stressful this time is too. We haven't even addressed what's going on in the world, but it's shit. And we both feel that it's shit. And that's my acknowledgement of it here. So I'm offering like 30 days of healing. Basically, there's 2 one-on-one calls with me. There's a weekly distance healing that's mini that drops in just while you're going about your day, so you don't have to make space for it. And I'm going to do an intuitive card pull as well to help you with an issue. So that is going to have a link by the time this airs.
So I'm looking forward to that. That sounds like a magical experience for anybody who signs up.
It dropped in last week and it was just, this is what I must
We're doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love that. You can find us over on social media, over on Instagram at the.woocurious.podcast. Come join us over there. We have clips of our episodes. We have some funny things that we share in our stories. Yeah, definitely follow along for our stories. They have been great. And you can message us both there. If you enjoy this podcast, go ahead and leave us a 5-star review wherever it is that you're listening to this right now. And tell your friends. We adore when you share this with people that you love. And this week in particular, we had so many people who reached out to us that said, oh, I passed this on to other people, somebody in my life, or they've come to us because of somebody who has passed an episode on to them. So a referral of this podcast is just exquisite, people. Thank you.
Thank you. We love hearing from you. And the more, the merrier.
The more the merrier. Okay, Woo Crew, that's all for this week. We will see you again next week with a whole different episode. Bye for now.